This video is a deeper dive into the table definitions in the Excel connector. We recommend that prior to viewing this screencast, you have a working knowledge of the Excel connector or have watched the Excel connector screencast. Table definitions are an important part of the Excel connector. They define which entities are being retrieved from GENESYS, the specific data to output, and where new data will be created within the project. When you have Excel open, are logged into GENESYS, and have a project selected, click on the Table Definition button in the ribbon on the GENESYS tab. That will open the Table Definition dialog. With this dialog open, you can now proceed. The section at the top left determines which, if any, table definition you are using. Clicking on the drop-down will show you the list of available table definitions from the project you are viewing. We have included some basic table definitions for use in common scenarios. You are free to use these as is or as a starting point for your own table definition. The box below the drop-down will show the description of the selected table definition. This section is where you can save or delete table definitions. Please note that if a table definition is marked as essential, it cannot be overwritten or deleted. If you select an essential table definition, edit it, and want to save it, choose the Save As option to create a new one. To start with a blank table definition, simply select New from the drop-down menu. You can then define your own table definition from scratch. Please note that when table definitions are saved, they are saved within the selected project. If you would like to move table definitions from one project to another, you would need to export the table definitions from the project in GENESYS and then import them into the other project. This is done from the Application menu in GENESYS by selecting Export. When the Export dialog comes up, make sure you have your project selected on the left. From the top drop-down menu, select Advanced Options. Once that has been chosen, check only Table Definitions in the Options section on the right. That will export just the table definitions from your project so that you can import them into a different project. Note that all of the table definitions are exported and will overwrite any in the other project that have the same name. The drop-downs below the Save and Delete options allow you to apply a filter and/or a sort block to the initial dataset retrieved from GENESYS, specify the default class used when creating entities in GENESYS, and which Excel sheet you would like to bring the information into. You can also use the Auto Format the Worksheet selection to have the data formatted for you. This can help you to avoid manual reformatting in some cases. In the top right, you will see Class/Folder and Package tabs with the specific classes or folders and packages listed below. Checking boxes here will select which class or folder or package to query for the dataset. You can select multiple entries if you desire. The bottom section is where you define the entries for your table definition. Each entry represents a separate column and defines the data that will be shown in said column. When you select a table definition from the drop-down, the folder, filter, sort block, default class, and entries for the table definition are automatically populated. I'll select Open Concerns from the table definition drop-down. You can see that when I do, all of the things in the dialog are populated. From here, we'll go through the entries so that we know what to expect from the output. The Position column correlates to a column in Excel. With the current selection, we will have 5 columns once we bring the information out of GENESYS. The Type column here indicates what type of data you want to retrieve. If you click on the drop-down, you can select from a wide range of data types to insert into a column. The Data/Definition column determines the specific value of the chosen type. Clicking on this drop-down enables you to select from many points of data. The values available here depend on which selection you have made in the type column. The Based On column determines the source object for the entry. You can base it on the data itself or other columns in your table definition. The Header section allows you to display what text makes sense to you for the column. It will have information in here by default, but you can make changes by clicking in the box for the header. Depending on the selections made for your columns, there are other options that may or may not be accessible. Repeat data will duplicate the cell output for each subsequent row until new data is set for that column. Sort block applies a GENESYS-specific sort block to the data. This also applies the selected sort block's representation to the output. The default target class determines which GENESYS class to use when creating new entities in GENESYS. Single cell will output all the information into one cell, as opposed to creating new lines for each returned entity. Show column will output the data into the column. Sometimes you will want to use a query to retrieve data, but not display it in Excel. From here, we will make our own table definition. Again, to make a new one, you can either edit an existing definition or select New from the drop-down. I'll select New so we can start from scratch. Remember that the position determines the ordering of the columns. After I set my default class and select which class and folder I want to query, I'll select the type class for my first entry. Selecting class allows you to pull either the class name or class alias out of your model. With the type class selected, I'll set the data definition to name so we can pull out the class name. Second, I'll add the entity name by selecting the type entity. From here, I'll add an entity attribute. When adding an entity attribute, selecting name will bring out the same information as selecting the type entity. I'll change this entry to description so we can retrieve the description of each entity. Next, I want to output a parameter. To do that, I'll select parameter after adding a new entry. Please note that you have the option to select parameter objective, threshold, design, observed, and units values separately. To do that, select the appropriate entry. Simply selecting parameter as the type will bring out the objective and units values together. After this, I want to add a new entry, and then I want to select folder. This will output what folder the entity is in. After this, I'm going to output a relationship. You'll notice that after I add the new entry and go to select the type, there are three options: relationship, relationship target, and relationship attribute. Relationships include three parts: the source, target, and linkage between them. While selecting relationship will output the target entity names, this selection enables you to get any relationship attributes that are part of that relationship. I'll show that now by selecting relationship attribute as a new entry and then basing it off the relationship in the entry above. If you want to get the targets of a relationship and then more data based on those targets, choose relationship target. From here, you can get the target information or targets of relationships from this entity. I'll retrieve the target's description. Notice that in the entry that I'm adding, I am changing the based on to the entry above. This is also where unchecking the single cell option is useful. Finally, I'll choose the type System Property for my 10th and final entry in this table definition. I'll then choose ID so we can bring out the IDs of these entities. With my table definition set up, I'll bring the data out of Genesys and into Excel by using the Load button at the bottom right. A warning will come up that lets you know that anything in the current sheet will be deleted. Once the data loads, you can see the information in Excel and then change it using the normal Excel features. For more information on the Excel connector as a whole, please reference the Microsoft Excel connector guide that comes installed with Genesys. You can also visit our screencast page and view the Excel connector screencast. For more information and resources on Genesys, please visit our website or contact our support team.